6 months ago, on January 24th of this year, I spoke to you at the last location about the nature of communism and how it develops. And communism basically is the enemy. It didn't stop being the enemy in 1992. They simply joined the Green Movement or the various other movements that have given us wokeism and the bizarre culture wars that we have today. It is still communism by any other name. And this time, instead of talking about the enemy, I wanted to talk a bit about us. So what you have in your handout has the rather pretentious title of Why the West, that's Western civilization, is unique in developing American liberty. No other society has developed liberty, certainly not the American variant. So we're going to get to that. First of all, what is the West? Western civilization, or more properly Judeo-Christian Western civilization, is the child of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Christian faith, and the Germans and Goths who conquered the Western Roman Empire. The West began in the chaos that followed the fall of the Roman Empire. And it developed, you know how a raindrop develops around a mote of dust in the atmosphere and water coheres around it and then it gets heavy and it falls? Well, the mote of dust that's at the center of Western civilization is the Christian faith. And everything that has developed since is developed around this center. So what had been the dissenting view throughout most of the late ancient world, the view of the Christian, is the official view or the orthodox view in our society. And Christian ideas and assumptions, as you will see, are at the heart of what brings us freedom. Now, Western civilization is not something that has been studied across the board in most schools. And that's something that's changing. In 2018, I was fortunate to get inspired to try to include a requirement for high school graduation to take and pass at least one course in the history of Western civilization. What I said was trying to understand America without understanding the West is like walking into the original Star Wars movie when everyone arrives on the Death Star. That is not the way to start the movie. You start the movie at the beginning. The Death Star happens about halfway through the film. And you can't understand the United States, you can't understand the inspiration of the Founding Fathers without understanding Western civilization. So Senator Ben Teeves has really taken this bull by the horns. And, yeah, it's one of those names, Teeves. It's spelled toes, but you're absolutely right. I never get it right. But that guy has chosen to make this one of his causes. The Idaho Freedom Foundation has come on board. And this summer, I took part in the state committee to set up a state description of a Western civilization course, which is in the process of being brought before the various educational committees and ultimately will go to the legislature and to the governor for a signature. That is the first step in getting the state to then require it. You can't have the state require a course that they don't have a description for. So now they have a description for, or they should, after this process is done, have a description for Western civilization. And the justification for this is the same. You can't understand who we are without understanding where we come from. History is where our identity lives. It's where we inherit it from, and we can accept or reject that identity, but without understanding the history, we are sort of like an amnesiac trying to rebuild their life from a null point, from a point of forgetfulness. We need to know who we are. So we in the West are a child of Greece, Rome, the Christians, and the Goths and Germans who conquered Rome. Why does it matter aside from, well, American freedom? Well, the West is the first industrial culture. The West develops factories, no one else does. Everywhere else in the world, including industrial India and China, are industrial because they acquired that method and technology from us. The West is the first and only society to naturally develop ideas of inalienable human rights, of liberty and freedom. The West is the only society that allowed or had an independent church capable of rebuking kings and emperors throughout the Middle Ages. And that independent church was key in inculcating the idea that even the king is under God's law. Even the government is accountable to a higher transcendent standard. Because everywhere else on earth, India, China, the Middle East, this tribal societies of the jungles, it's all there about power. Their government controls their faith. Julius Caesar was high priest of the Roman Republic, Pontifex Maximus, before and as he took over the state. But in the West, the church and the state, for 1,000 years of the Middle Ages, are competing for supreme power. Neither one of them has it. And to this day, governments do not allow, or governments in the West are not allowed to transgress too deeply into the religious realm. So the West develops freedom, the West develops industry, the West has an independent moral standard beyond the government's power to control, and the West cares about the individual. In Confucian society, in China, in Korea, in Japan, in Vietnam, the family name comes first, because the individual is a subset of the true life form, which is the family, the true life form. And the family has an identity, and the family has honor, and the family has face. And everything that you do, it's like walking around with a giant glass fishbowl in your arms. Every act that you take as an individual reflects upon not only your living family, but on your ancestors in the afterlife. And if you want to humiliate your lovely grandmother who is in the afterlife, act in a disgraceful way. And the little old ladies in the afterlife will say, "Oh, you must be so embarrassed. Oh, it's such a shame that you had a grandson like that fellow who did that shameful, disgraceful thing." So in the East, the family is the true building block of society. In the West, it's the individual. Christ didn't come to save groups. Christ came to save men and women. Christ came to save individuals. And as you will see in these various societies from Greece, it is the individual human being that is given a role and a scope and a stage far greater than anywhere else in society. Tribal societies are essentially communitarian. Nobody owns anything because there's nothing to own. Every man hunts, every woman gathers, everything is held in common. Marriages are done in common. Everything is done together. In the West, we have individualism. And this produces a society that ends up conquering the world. Before World War I, there were a handful of countries that weren't European, that weren't under Western civilization. The United States does not get its heritage, cultural heritage, from the natives who once lived here. The United States gets its cultural heritage from England and more broadly from Europe. So there were only a handful of countries before World War I that weren't directly under European rule, and they were influenced by it. So even if we weren't of the West, we'd still have to contend with it. So let's find out a little bit about what the Western heritage is. It starts off with Judaism. In the Jewish faith, in the creation myth, human beings are made in God's image. What does that mean? Does that mean, as Michelangelo painted him, God is a wise old man with a gray beard and a loving but stern countenance pointing to Adam, and Adam is receiving the spark of life in that famous painting? I think it's probably because we are aware, we think, we remember, we anticipate. We have a past, a present, and a future. We have minds, we have souls. In that sense, we are alive. We are not mere animals. We are made in God's image because we can think, we can judge. God did not create robots. God created people who are given the responsibility of learning and deciding between good and evil. That's our job. Men are, in the Genesis creation story, the namer of things. What does that mean? Well, in every society that has magic, Learning the name of something, the true name of something, gives you power over it. If there's an elemental or a spirit, if you learn its name, you can command it. The name of God was something that was kept very, very secret. And when Moses at the burning bush asks God, how shall I have the people call you? He doesn't give a name. He doesn't say, I'm Joe. He says, I am who am, which Moses translates as Yahweh. Because the naming of things is a direct connection to the soul. That's what the belief was. So we human beings, when Adam names the four-legged barky thing, dog, Adam is not just finding a descriptive sound to associate with the dog. He's actually helping to shape its soul. In other words, human beings, because we are made in God's image, are given the opportunity for secondary creation. We name things. We redesign the world to suit us. We are given dominion by the greater dominion of God. So we are decision makers. This goes back to Genesis. We are the gardeners of Eden. Women, feminists hate this when I talk about it. But women are created to be the helpmates of men and the mothers of humanity. Have you looked at men? Do you think we need help? Oh, yes, we need help. God chose woman to give us help because otherwise we're hopeless. So in Genesis, Eve has an important job. Now, in the Jewish stories that go beyond the scripture of the Old Testament, there are stories of rebellion. God gives creatures, including angels, some degree of free will. And the angels look at God's plan to give a lump of clay a soul. And they say, why, God? Why are you giving human beings a soul? They're dirt. And the prophecy is they'll burn the earth someday. Why are you doing it? And God says, who are you talking to? And they say, God. And he says, right, that's why, because I'm God. I understand these things. And a group of angels rebelled, and that's where you get the story of the adversary, of Satan, of Diabolos, of confusion through and through. The enemy comes from the sin of looking at God's choices and saying, you screwed up, I can do better. You also have in Judaism the story of a rebellious woman. Before Eve, there was Lilith. Lilith was Adam's first wife in Jewish mythology. And Lilith resented the idea that women were a mere helpmate to men. She thought that she should be Adam's superior, or at the very least, Adam's equal. And so she rebelled against her role and eventually was cast out with the demons. What does rebellion have to do with the West? We are not mere passive beings. We are not, like in the Confucian Chinese system or the Taoist Chinese system, like willow branches flowing with every breath of wind. We are not merely here to passively accept what the universe gives us. When God makes us in his image, the belief is, and when we are given free will, the belief is, we are going to make decisions. Do we agree with it? Do we not agree with it? And if we don't agree with something, that we could end up in rebellion. Rebellion is nothing new. Rebellion isn't so much questioning God. Rebellion is digging your heels in saying, damn it, God, you're wrong. That's a difference. That's an important difference. Everyone is welcome to question what God's choices are, why there needs to be suffering, war, and all of that. But ultimately, a believer is supposed to accept. Not passively, actively, but to accept God's dominion. And this all has to do with the creation of the individual. And the individual is the building block of the West. Now, the Jewish faith is the first great monotheistic faith, the belief that there is only one creator of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. And this is the first thing that creates anti-Semitism. The world at that time believes that you cannot have the same motive power creating first love's first kiss and cancer. You cannot have the same motive power behind nobility and honor and duplicity and dishonor. So to the pagan, the idea of a single God was not only unthinkable, it was obnoxious. And the Jews set themselves apart from everyone else. And they said, no, we know there's only one God. And that one God is in relation to us. We are God's chosen people. So the rest of the world said, oh, that's convenient. So there's only one God, and that happens to be your God. And my God and all the other gods that my people worship, they're just false, right? So this stance that the Jews had of a singular God, of a singular Lord, all-knowing, omniscient, all-powerful, omnipotent, everywhere, without exception, omnipresent. It was like nails on a chalkboard for the ancients. But the challenge of a monotheist is to say, world, yeah, you've got your ideas, but there's something higher. And I am loyal to that something which is higher, which transcends, which is beyond the world. A Western individual in the United States, anywhere else in the Western world, has their primary loyalty to the truth, capital T, capital T. And for most, throughout the history of Western civilization, that truth has been a monotheistic truth. It has been a Judeo-Christian truth, God's law, God's rule above any human rule. So Abram first hears the word of God, and he goes through a series of ordeals, harrowing ordeals, terrifying ordeals, and he eventually becomes Abraham, the patriarch, the founder of all monotheisms, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic. The key moment in Abraham's life, and again, this has to do with the challenge of living in a Western society. Abram was old. His wife Sarai was old. She had gone through menopause. She wasn't going to have children. But God said, Abram, you will be the father of many nations. How can I be? I don't have any children. Who am I? You're God. Trust me. I know how it's going to turn out. So Abram has a son with a slave girl, Ishmael, and Abram has Isaac with his wife. Shouldn't he be? It's a miracle. Woman over 100 years old has a baby. And Isaac is the apple of Abram's eye. Isaac is everything that God promised Abram coming true. Isaac is the future. Isaac is the link between Abram and all of his suffering and the future where he is the father of many nations. And God says when Isaac is 7 or 8 years old, bring the boy up to the holy mountain. Bring him up to the altar. Oh, and bring a sharp knife. So Abram goes to the holy mountain with his son and with a very sharp knife. And Abram hopes that God has an animal to sacrifice. And God says, take that boy, that lovely boy that is your future, that is all of your hopes in this world wrapped up, lay him down on the altar, tell him it's going to be okay, and sacrifice him to me. Nothing in the world is as important to Abram as his son. But he does it. He takes the person, the son that he loves more than anything else, lays him down on the altar, tells him to close his eyes, takes out his knife, and starts to strike. And God says, stop! Stop! You were going to do it. You've proven your fidelity. You've proven your loyalty beyond all doubt. Tell the boy to go play. We're going to have a talk. You are no longer Abram. You are Abraham. You have chosen to be true to me even at the expense of the thing, of the person, of the son, more precious to you than anything else in your life. That's the basis of our covenant. I will teach, I will lead, you and your people will learn, you and your people will obey. And that is the basis of the Jewish faith, that total commitment. A normal person is dominated by the urge to survive. Somebody from the West and somebody who is primarily oriented towards a religious faith, they are oriented towards transcendent truth that is more important than any survival instinct, even the survival instinct of your own children. There's a totality of commitment there that has something to do with the kind of freedom we have. And finally, in Moses' time, God lays down 14 commandments that are divided differently. The Jews divide them differently from the Catholics and the Orthodox, who divide them differently than Protestants and Reformed Christians. But in these 10 commandments, God tells you a bunch of religious precepts. You will have no false gods before me. You will honor honor the Sabbath day. Don't make any graven images. But there are also social laws, which anyone, even an atheist, should be able to agree with. Honor your father and mother. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't want what isn't yours. And don't murder. Thou shalt not kill doesn't usually, in most interpretations, apply to execution of capital criminals or warfare. It applies to a private decision. I'm going to kill this person. That's murder. You're not allowed to do that. So God sets out a law, and Western society is based on these 10 commandments. That's why there are so many conflicts over whether they should be posted at courthouses, in schools, and so forth. And I am very happy to say that having them posted in classrooms is becoming more and more common around the United States, or at least in school lobbies and things like that. So the Jewish tradition gives us a lot. Babylon gives us the oldest code of laws. Hammurabi's Babylon says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life among equals. And this is a basic idea. Before this, law had been private. The law of force. Me strong, you weak. You do what I want or I pound you. And then there was the law of family. Blood calls out for blood. You gave my little sister an Indian burn, I'm going to break your arm. You broke my son's arm, I'm going to cut your arm off. You cut my son's arm off, I'm going to kill you. The law of family, blood calls out for blood, leads to feuding. The law of the king says, justice is mine. You come to me for justice. You don't take justice into your own hands. So if you accidentally or on purpose take out the eye, or knock out the tooth of an equal, the same will be done to you at worst. It places a maximum limit on justice. So why does the law of family, blood calls out for blood, you gave my sister an Indian burn, so I'm going to break your arm, why does it always escalate? Well, it escalates because terror, ladies and gentlemen, as you well know, is a form of communication. And by breaking the arm of the lousy, rotten jerk that gave my sister an Indian burn, I'm communicating a message to the world. Don't mess with my family, or I'll hurt you bad. That doesn't need to be done by the king, because he's the king. He's got priests saying he's the king, and the gods want him there, and he's got an army that says, sir, yes, sir, whenever he says to take or do or kill anyone. So the king doesn't have much to prove. So the king limits justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth today is seen to be cruel. Oh, an eye for an eye will make the world go blind, says the lovely bumper stickers out there. No. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth makes the king's justice reasonable, legitimate, proportional. If you're found guilty of knocking out a guy's tooth, the executioner will walk up to you and say, nothing personal, buddy, bam, and knock out your tooth. That's the worst that will happen to you. So the king's justice is proportional. Now that's among equals. If you're a poor guy and you mess with a rich person, you're going to die or you're going to be enslaved. If you're a rich person and you mess with a poor person, you'll pay a fine. Because the king is also making a law to preserve the social order. That's why among Hammurabi's laws, there's a law, if a son should strike his father, the hand that struck the father shall be cut off. Chop, chop, bye-bye, you're stompy for the rest of your life. Why? My students always say that that's so cruel. Well, what does a boy who grows up smacking around the old man become when he becomes a man? He becomes a rebel. He becomes the kind of man that will raise his hands against the king. And the king won't have it. So basic laws of culture and society are set up in the Jewish faith and by the Babylonian Code of Justice, Hammurabi's Code. From ancient Greece, we get a love of creativity, we get a love of the individual. Homer's stories, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are about men and gods who are like men, with all the foibles of men and women, all of the passions and the blindness and the anger. And the Greeks say, this is not imperfect. This is life. This is reality. The world is filled with imperfect men and women who love, who lust, who lie, who do a bunch of other things that begin with L. And what in the end they come up with is a set of gods and a set of stories that deal with the challenges of being a flawed human being who still tries to be a civilized, honorable person. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus is cursed because he says, I, a mortal man, destroyed Troy, which isn't true. Poseidon, the god of the sea, helped Odysseus. Odysseus did not give honor to Poseidon. So Odysseus was cursed to wander the world until he learned some wisdom. But Odysseus never stopped loving his wife. He never stopped wanting to be back at home in Ithaca with his son. He was true as he could be. There were magicians and sorceresses who forced him to sleep with them, but he did it to get home. He didn't do it because he was disloyal to Penelope, his wife. And Penelope was loyal to Odysseus. When the rest of the world knew that Odysseus would be dead, Penelope refused to marry another man. She refused to give up on Odysseus, not until her son was 17 years old, and her son was conceived when Odysseus left for the Trojan War. Not until her son was 17 and had his first beard did Penelope even consider marrying another man. And the only reason she did that is Odysseus made her promise, if I'm not home and the beard is on my son's chin, marry another man. So she was still following his orders. A civilized person doesn't act like an animal. A civilized person doesn't act like survival, their own wants, their own needs is the only important thing. A civilized person always comports themselves, if they're an honorable person, with honor. And even if it costs them. And that is one of the big lessons of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Civilization is hard, but it's worth it. And the building block of civilization is a city culture. The polis, it's called, P-O-L-I-S. And the city culture is like a lens of creativity. It's designed to bring out the creativity of the individuals who live there, who work there. In every polis, there's an agora, a marketplace of goods, services, and ideas. You know how in the United States, when malls were a thing, you may not know this, but back in the day, people would go to malls and they would just go, not just for shopping, they'd go for fun, have some meal, socialize with people. Teenagers used to go to the mall and hang out. If a person stood up in the mall and started talking politics or religion, they would be taken away by the men in white coats. We Americans don't like to have our commerce interfered with by philosophy or religion or politics. But in ancient Greece, in the agora, anyone who wanted to could go to the agora and start talking. And the natural consequences of what the crowd thought of what they said would be very, very clear. If the crowd liked it, they'd put, copper pieces or silver pieces or maybe even a gold piece into their bag. If they didn't like it, they'd throw rocks. Or they'd go to the fruit merchant and find yesterday's fruit, and they'd throw rotten fruit and vegetables at your head. That's the natural consequence, but that's okay. Anyone was allowed to do it. The agora was a free speech zone. Anyone's allowed to say anything. Well, that's something kind of important to us Americans. We're not limited to saying things that don't offend people. We're not limited to saying things that aren't disinformation, according to some people. We're allowed to say whatever the hell we want. And we bear the consequences of that. Freedom of speech is for communists. It's for Klansmen. It's for everyone in between. Freedom of speech is for anyone to say what they think and not be protected from the consequences of their words, to experience the consequences of their words. But the idea of some government coming in and saying, no, you can't say that. No. That's not according to the Greek idea of freedom, and it's not according to our idea of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is for the obnoxious people. Because if you're saying something everyone agrees with, there's no need for freedom of speech. You're going to listen because you want to. In Athens, you have the first system of freedom where everyday citizens are made the caretakers of politics. In Athens, Pericles, the great Athenian leader, once said, "We don't call a man who's uninvolved in politics quiet. We call him useless." People were expected to be able to do their business and handle the business of the state. So it was everyday people who decided what the tax rate should be, whether we should have peace or war, what the laws should be. You'd go, everyone could speak once, and you'd vote. And that's it. Democracy worked in Athens for a while. But ultimately, democracy, as our founding fathers understood, failed because it's unstable. First of all, it only works at a small scale. Secondly, democracy, pure democracy, Athenian democracy, depends upon active citizens. Citizens who have a warrior's understanding of the nature of war and peace. Citizens who have a treasurer's understanding about the value of money. Citizens who have a philosopher or priest's understanding of the value of choice. If people start voting for the person who gives them the most money from the public treasure, democracy will always fall. If people vote what they think is right for the society, democracy will always succeed. And what always happens within 200 years of pure democracy being created is you have generations that are not raised right. It's not their fault, it's their parents' fault for not raising them right, who don't understand how precious these choices are and who let men come in who say, "I'll take care of you, just give me your power. I'll give you security, you give me your freedom." And sooner or later, democracies always do that. So that's one of the risks. Where are we time-wise?
You have 15 minutes.
Okay, good. Well, see how slow I'm being. So Greece gives us the individual and creativity. The Roman Republic gives us a law, no kings in Rome. When they kick out the kings, anyone who's trying to become king has to be killed, and then you justify it after the fact. So the assassins of Julius Caesar were following the law. They were killing Caesar because Caesar was acting like a king. But instead of staying to be judged, they fled, and there was a civil war. The idea that the people have a duty to rule themselves is very Roman. But the Romans don't do it through direct democracy. They have officials. They have elected officials. But the Romans were really big on dividing power between these officials. They didn't even have a single president. They had 2 consuls, and each consul had equal power. Because the Romans understood that human nature is so greedy that if you give one person too much power, he'll eventually try to make himself a dictator. This power between the 2 presidents of Rome, the 2 consuls, was so great that during the fight against Hannibal in Italy, the Carthaginian, one consul wanted to fight Hannibal, so every day he was in command, the army marched as quickly as it could towards Hannibal's camp. And the other consul, who understood if we get near Hannibal, he's going to destroy us, marched his army away from Hannibal's camp every day. But Roman law said they command the same army every other day. So the Roman army was doing a zigzag, Hannibal away from Hannibal, Hannibal away from Hannibal, for months, for the entire term of office of these 2 consuls, because they couldn't agree on what to do. Because the Romans didn't want anyone to have too much power. They would have a dictator. A dictator was there for at most 6 months, and the dictator could be sued after leaving office if they violated the Constitution. So you could give somebody total power. Best dictator in the world is a guy named Cincinnatus. Italy's invaded by a bunch of barbarians. Roman armies are destroyed. They go to a retired general and senator named Cincinnatus who's working in his turnip fields. Senators show up in their white togas with purple stripes, and they say, "Cincinnatus, Cincinnatus, we are beset by barbarians. Please help us." And like an old Maine farmer with a piece of wheat in his mouth, he looks at him and says, "Yeah." He gets out of the turnip fields, gets on his horse, rides to the army camp, trains it up for 2 weeks, fights the barbarians, beats them. And before the battle is over, but after the battle has been decided, Cincinnatus says to his other officers, "I'm done. I'm going back to my farm. Bye." The height of good manners is knowing when to leave. Cincinnatus was the most well-mannered dictator in human history. He didn't keep power a moment longer than he had to. So the next time, I don't know, maybe you don't have conversations like this, but the next time somebody asks you, who's the greatest dictator in world history? It's not Stalin, it's not Mao, it's not Hitler, it's Cincinnatus. He came, he did the job, he went home. That's what we want out of a dictator. The Roman Republic also thrives by Romanizing the people it conquers, by passing its culture on to the people it conquers. But that takes centuries. I'm going quickly because of time. What does Christianity give us? First off, the primary authority is not the king. It's not the priesthood. It's not the church. It's not the army. It's not anything human. The primary authority, the source of all legitimacy, is God. And even kings are accountable to God. In the Middle Ages, the Holy Roman Emperor offended the church. And the Pope, Innocent III, excommunicated the Holy Roman Emperor, the Emperor of Germany and Italy. Nobody in Germany could receive Holy Communion, confession, could receive extreme unction, the anointing of the sick and dying, could be baptized. And very quickly it became clear that people in Germany were not happy and that the emperor would have to make a deal with the Pope. So at Canossa in the Italian Alps, the emperor of Italy and Germany, in the middle of a snowstorm, outside of a castle where the Pope is in a tower room sipping spiced wine by a fire, watches the emperor go to his knees in the snow, shouting, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, I'm at fault, I'm most grievously at fault, begging the apology of the Pope. After a few hours, the Pope comes down and accepts his forgiveness, but it's very clear who has the power in this relationship. Now, a few years later, the King of France captured the popes, brought them to France, and used them as puppets for about 80 years. Hello, puppet. So there were times when the state dominated the church. There were times when the church dominated the state. But the Christian church was independent of the government. And what this allowed was a few things. First of all, the Holy Roman Emperor and the kings, if they violated God's law, they could be excommunicated, they could be overthrown. And it happened. Number two, like in a household with two parents, if dad is strict about some things and easy about others, and mom is strict about different things and easy about others, a child very quickly learns which parent to go to ask certain questions. You don't ask dad about this, dad will go crazy. You ask mom will say yes, and vice versa. Well, the people of Europe had dad and mom. They had the kings and they had the Pope and the church. And so the competition between church and state allowed the people of Europe to gain more power, to gain more rights, something that would not happen in Asia or Africa or the Americas. Also, Jesus wasn't a nobleman. Jesus' followers were fishermen following a carpenter. The most high status person among them was a tax collector. And he was high status as far as the Romans were concerned, but the government, the Jewish people hated Matthew because he was a tax collector. The Iliad and the Odyssey are about the nobility of men who are warriors and great. Jesus came to save them, but he also came to save poor men, obscure men. He came to save women. How many gospel stories are there of Jesus encountering women? Of Jesus encountering children, of Jesus working with slaves? All human beings are Jesus' work. All human beings are made in God's image. All human beings have value. That doesn't mean communism. That means that God doesn't look at any one of us as disposable, as a human resource. God looks at us and says, you're mine. And Western civilization, because of that Christian message, because of that totality of Jesus' saving message, is concerned about everyone. Now, does the West always live up to this? No. But with a modicum minimum of respect to the 1619 Project, who says that slavery built America and that slavery defines America, you morons. No society in human history has done more to end slavery than the West. The greatest anti-slavery force in human history is the British Empire. In the 1820s and 30s, they eliminated slavery within their empire, and they then spent the next 90 years fighting wars against slavers and slavery. In the United States, we fight our bloodiest war to keep the Union together free, in part to end slavery. So when somebody says, oh, people today should give reparations, really? First of all, how many slaves do you know? I kind of think they're all dead. Secondly, not only did I never enslave everyone, but our country paid at the office. We paid with the blood of our ancestors in the American Civil War. No reparations. The reparations is you were made free citizens. That's your reparations. What makes the West distinct is that because we have this idea of a transcendent Christian truth, we reform ourselves. We've applied the idea of franchisement, of you deserve the vote, you deserve to be a full citizen, you deserve to be a full citizen to almost everyone. No other society does that. In a communist society, you're a member of the inner party or you're nothing. The Communist Party of China doesn't care about the Chinese people. They're slaves, they're livestock. The Communist Party of China cares about the leadership of the Communist Party of China. That's its goal. That's its interest group. But we in the West, particularly in the United States, have ripped our own guts out again and again and again to make a more perfect union. And in what standard is that more perfect judged? It's a Judeo-Christian standard of right. The decade where I was born in the 1960s saw the country rip itself apart. I grew up in a Bronx that looked like Berlin 1945 because of the burned out blocks of buildings from the race riots of the 1960s. The civil rights movement and all that was involved with that was not an easy experience. Some of you are old enough to have remembered it firsthand. We did that. We did that willingly. We did that willingly to make our society better. We didn't do that so that people in the early 2000s could say, there's structural racism. No. You're not allowed to be racist. You're not allowed to employ racist politics. Not since the year before I was born. Not since 1964 are you allowed to be institutionally racist. What defines the West? We're self-critical. What defines the West? We value the individual like the Greeks. What defines the West? We value every individual as Jesus did. What defines the West? We look to a higher standard than the ruling party or the person in power. And this difference in our history, which has so much more depth that I obviously didn't have time to get into, is what makes us different. It's also what gave us industry. Every new invention took jobs away from people. Every new invention challenged the social order. But in the West, because of the fall of the unified Roman Catholic Church during the Protestant Reformation, anyone was allowed to think anything without being afraid of being taken before the Holy Inquisition and burned at the stake as a heretic. So the scientific revolution happens. And then the industrial revolution happens as people develop the cotton gin like Eli Whitney did. We develop new ways of doing things, and those new ways of doing things transform life more than anything since the development of farming. And before that, the development of fire. And before that, the development of language. The Industrial Revolution changes everything, and we do it. Why? Because we empower individual people to think their own thoughts and be creative, and we don't punish them because they rock the boat. No one else does this, not in the same way, not on a large scale. It's important that you, as Americans, understand what makes America exceptional. It's not just that we're free. It's where we get our freedom from. It's why we're free. If you don't value the individual, if you don't give the individual the freedom to think, if you don't give the individual the freedom to speak, if you don't give the individual the freedom to innovate, nothing happens except compulsion, except power, except the rule of force. And finally, there's this. Without Christ or some other faith, life ends badly. I'm reaching an age where my own mortality is becoming very clear to me. I always knew about it, but now I know more about it. Some of you know more than I do. But with Christ, there's the hope of heaven. With God, there's the hope of heaven. The Muslims even have a sense of this. And other religions too, the Buddhists, the Hindus, they have their afterlives. But the alternative to the West that is offered within our society, secular humanism, is all about this world. It's all about the material world. It's all about the body, not the soul. They deny the existence of the soul. They say everything is for the body. The body will end up as fertilizer. It's the soul that lives on. If you want to understand why so many people are going crazy, if you want to understand why so many people do suicide by cop or murder suicides like that horrible person up on Canfield Mountain a month ago, they have no hope. Our society has Judeo-Christian ideas at the center, and therefore our society has been hopeful. Yeah, this isn't the only world. This isn't the only life. There is an afterlife. What are you going to do, threaten me with heaven? And yet, our scientific, humanist, atheistic fellows have raised generations of people that don't have that conviction. So when their own mortality comes knocking, what do? Well, some of them go crazy and decide to take other people with them. You can't have a United States without Judeo-Christian roots. You cannot have a Western civilization without Christianity. So the next time somebody says Merry Christmas is controversial, well, look, you want to wish me a Kwasi Kwanzaa, a Happy Hanukkah, a Super Solstice, that's fine. I'm going to say Merry Christmas. Because as flawed and imperfect a Christian I am a Christian. And I am in a tolerant Christian society. I'm not in a society that's religiously neutral. I'm not in a society of atheists that permit religious people. No, I'm in a Judeo-Christian Western civilization that permits other people to believe what they believe, but don't try to suppress me. Don't try to suppress the majority. Don't try to suppress the Judeo-Christian elements within our society, because if you do, you destroy our freedom. That's what I've got. Do we have time for questions or no?
Yes, yeah, a few minutes.
Okay, so questions, comments, thoughts?
Thanks so much for your emphasis on principles. I wanted to ask two things as an educator about the current publicity about China and deals that Trump's making with various countries. I've often wondered how you can have, or if you can have, a productive trade relationship commercially with a country which fundamentally has a totally different worldview. And their people act differently, they're expected differently, the government thinks differently. Yet we want to treat them as equals in terms of trade. And the second question was, as an educator, the impact of artificial intelligence.
Okay,
for students.
I'll start with the second. I don't think the job of educators is to help people to think with the newest technology. I think our job is to help people think unplugged. I personally have very dark thoughts about AI. AI is not a mammal. Every intelligent creature we've ever heard of has mammalian clinginess, nursing, love, cuddling, all that stuff. AI is a crystalline intelligence. It's not even reptilian. It is alien in a way we can't imagine. And there are people who want to give control of our power grid, our military, our economy to this thing. That's insane. That is species suicide. If you look at the book of Revelations, the beast is a soulless power. Well, AI is a soulless power. So personally, I think that AI, if allowed to have power over us, will destroy us. And so I don't use computers in my classroom except, to show movie clips and things like that. But there are a lot of educators, and a lot of my educator brethren and sisters are just fools. They think, oh, it's wonderful. We can. No. Even they understand that children and teenagers are going to have the AI write their term papers. So I don't do term papers anymore because they're easily faked. I do a more interactive way of testing my kids' understanding of things. AI is a challenge. It is the apple. It is the temptation. You can have freedom with ease. You can have productivity without sweat. And it is, I think, a dead end. I think at some point we may need to use AI, but we should always shackle it. We should always limit it. We should never allow it access to the internet. We should never allow it access to the real world. It should be a philosopher in isolation, if we even need it at all. As to trading with evil people, In retrospect, it was obvious that we shouldn't, that the powers shouldn't have let Hitler go into the Rhineland in 1936, or annex Austria in 1938, or take over the rest of Czechoslovakia in 38-39. But it wasn't until the Germans invaded Poland that the world is willing to fight over it. Anthony Eden tried to knock out Gamal Abdel Nasser, the dictator of Egypt, when he nationalized the Suez Canal. And everyone turned against him. His queen turned against him. President Eisenhower turned against him. The French and Israelis turned against him. The Russians exploited it because the world wasn't willing to go to war with Egypt. Eden was. Fighting evil is something that people unfortunately don't usually do up front. Fighting evil is something that people usually do when they have no other choice. So the U.S. supports Britain in World War II until the Japanese bomb us at Pearl Harbor. Had the Japanese not bombed us at Pearl Harbor, or worse, had Hitler declared war on Japan December 8th, 1941, what would the history of the world been? We waited because we didn't want to shed our blood. The Chinese are today's Nazi Germany, but they're worse. They've had power for longer. They're exterminating entire races of people, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs. They're doing genocide. Never again doesn't mean a damn thing if we're willing to do business with them. So personally, I think we should decouple and reindustrialize the United States. I think that we need to produce our own pharmaceuticals, our own steel, our own computer chips, everything. We're starting to. But it's going to take a long time. And there are going to be areas that are going to be made dirty by it, so the environmental regulations are going to have to be relaxed. I think that we should, because most people are not willing to go to war with China right now, I think that we should try to peaceably work and hope that somebody in China overthrows the communists. But that's a very hard hope to hope for because they have all the guns. Ultimately, I think the Chinese are going to go across Formosa Strait. I think they are going to go after Taiwan, and at that point, I think we have to fight them. If we don't fight them, I think the Japanese go their way, the Koreans go their way, the Vietnamese, the Indians, the Australians. I think we lose Asia, and I think we don't just lose Asia, but we become threatened here in our continent. Some would argue that's the same domino theory that was used in Vietnam. Yep, I believed it then as a child. I believe it now. And if you want to know why the dominoes didn't fall, maybe it's because for 10 years the Americans held the line in South Vietnam, so Thailand and the other countries of the area weren't taken over, which they might have been had we allowed the communists to take over Vietnam in 1965. I think we have to do business with evil people until they make it impossible, and then I think we have to fight them. My own opinion, call me wrong, and I'm too old to fight except if they come here, so I guess it's easy for me to say. Any other questions, or do we have to break off?
Well, that gentleman with the T, Tinkus is something, how do you spell that? He was the one that you said, once he went and did what he did, he went back to his farm.
Oh, Quinquenada. C-I-N, it's where Cincinnati comes from. I'm pronouncing it the Latin way, pretentious of me. C-I-N-A-T-U-S, Cincinnatus.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's what George Washington was called. George Washington, when he refused the kingship and when he refused a lifetime presidency, was called the American Quinquenadus or Cincinnatus because he refused to be a dictator. What are you, replacing one King George with another? No. Most important president ever. Any other questions, comments? No?
Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
And then, of course,
Yeah.
we have our, we'd love you to read this so you can have chocolate for the day.
Free government does require active citizen.
Yeah.
Very true.
And thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Beverly, and thank you all
Thank
for
you.
listening to me babble.